What's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. This is the Lone Gunman Podcast, episode number 191, and I am your host, Rob Clark, with you as per the usual. Before we get started today, I would encourage everyone out there to follow along on Twitter at the Lone Gunman 7. Make sure to subscribe to the Lone Gunman Podcast YouTube channel as well. It would be greatly and much appreciated. Before we get started on the topic of the day, which is going to be a closer look at the events immediately after the assassination in the Texas School Book Depository. I promise we're going to get there. But I wanted to start off the show. As you know, the last episode that I dropped was on Dean Andrews. And I came across some stuff recently that made my eyebrow raise a little bit, so I figured I'd share it with you as well. Now, I recently, finally, after ordering it 2.5 years ago, I finally got my hands on the book Coup in Dallas by H.P. Albarelli Jr. And I've always been a fan of Albarelli's work. Some people out there are not. I'm well aware of that. And I also take into consideration who this book was co-authored with. And I get all that. I understand all that. But you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Now, that being said, I have not read this book in its entirety yet. I just started it. And from what I see so far, it's interesting, to say the least. Now, how does this tie into the Dean Andrews story? Well, I'll tell you. Now, in the Dean Andrews story, we heard the interview, where Dean Andrews tells the interviewer that he threw two names out there, just to see if Garrison was kosher or not. And the names were Manuel Garcia Gonzalez and Ricardo Davis. Okay? Now, if you'll remember in the documents that we were going through, from the FBI documents, there was someone named R.R. Davis who had previous military experience, who was allegedly, as Dean Andrews called him, his lead investigator that worked for Dean Andrews. Now, interestingly enough, Ricardo Davis did exist. He was not a mere figment of Dean Andrews' imagination. Ricardo Davis's full name is Rudolph Richard Ricardo Davis Jr., hence R.R. Davis. And he was a very real person. And I'm going to read you a little bit here from my buddy Dusty Rhodes' blog, JFK's Coup, about Ricardo Davis. It says, Mr. Davis was questioned by Jim Garrison's staff during the trial of Clay Shaw. Ricardo Davis has for years been hidden in the shadows of assassination evidence. Personally, I think it's past time somebody shined a light on this alleged fictional person. A good place to start would be with quotes from Jack Ruby after he was arrested for the murder of Lee Oswald. After Ruby's arrest, he asked Dallas attorney Tom Howard to represent him. Howard accepted and asked Ruby if he could think of anything that might damage his defense. Ruby responded that there would be a problem if a man by the name of Davis should come up. Ruby told his attorney that he, quote, had been involved with Davis, who was a gun runner entangled in anti-Castro efforts. Now, why do you suppose Jack Ruby would be concerned if the name of Davis should come up? One of the first reasons Ruby might be concerned with his efforts to get, quote, jeeps to Cuba to make a profit Number 2, Jack Ruby was also reported to say to Wally Weston, "They are going to find out about Cuba. They're going to find out about the guns." And number 3, the HSCA would run off on a wild goose chase, trying to connect Thomas Eli Davis III to these comments by Ruby. This path led to nowhere and gave the HSC, in their view, further justification to not look for Davis any further. The HSC didn't bother to have a look at Davis, already identified as being involved with the anti-Castro Cubans and gun running. Typically, the FBI wasn't any help with investigating Davis either, at least according to the HSCA. Quote, "The FBI had been unable to identify anyone engaged in the sale of arms to Cuba who might be identical with a person named Davis." The previous quote is a bit odd, considering the numerous documents can be found in FBI files related to Mr. Davis. If anyone bothered to view those documents, they would find a possible reason why the FBI was unable to identify Mr. Davis. The reason being that Davis had direct ties to Lee Harvey Oswald. A few days after Oswald's altercation with Carlos Bernier and friends, members of the anti-Castro Cuban Directorio Revolucionario Estudiantil, or the DRE, Ricardo Davis would pay a visit to Oswald at his house. This was also a few days after the WDSU interview, to which the WDSU staff would deliberately label Oswald as a communist. This from a Garrison document. Subject, Rudolph Richard Davis Jr., an interview with on the 28th of February, 1967, in Houston, Texas. Davis said he was introduced to Oswald by Carlos Quiroga. Davis said he wanted to infiltrate Oswald's group and went to Oswald's house on Magazine Street with Quiroga about 8 p.m. one night shortly after the Bernier debate on television. Oswald's wife was home, and Davis could see Fair Play for Cuba leaflets inside the house. Davis did not actually enter the house, as Oswald came out on the sidewalk and conversed with them there. The meeting was very brief, and Davis was not accepted by Oswald. So, not only was Ricardo Davis acquainted with Jack Ruby and Oswald, he was very familiar with Carlos Bernier, Carlos Quiroga, and other members of the anti-Castro group, DRE members. All of these individuals had direct links to Lee Harvey Oswald. Ricardo Davis knew David Ferrie and Sergio Arcacha Smith when they worked with Guy Bannister. Another excerpt from a Garrison document, an interview with Davis. At one such meeting, according to Davis, Ferrie said he would go to Cuba and bomb all installations there. Arcacha told Davis that Ferrie was a pilot, and Davis stated he observed immediately that Ferrie was homosexual just by looking at him. Davis said he saw Ferrie about twice at Arcacha's house, and maybe 10 other times at all. According to Davis, he told Arcacha he was wasting his time. Although the number of times Davis saw or met Ferrie was conflicting, the number of meetings stated herein are the statements of Davis. Ricardo Davis also knew George Ray Gill, otherwise known as G. Ray Gill, attorney for Carlos Marcello. Ferrie, Jack Martin, and Guy Bannister had been working for Gill and Marcello in the months prior to JFK's assassination. Sergio Arcacha Smith was also familiar with Marcello and had been offered employment by him. Davis stated that he also knows Sylvia Odio and her brother. Davis stated he still carries a scar as a result of a fight with Odio when they were children in Cuba. So that's weird and wild stuff. So just to provide a brief and partial overview of Ricardo Davis's activities involving his, quote, anti-Castro Cuban ventures, see below. So we have another document here from Garrison stuff. And apparently, Davis set up a training site for exiled Cubans on the De La Barre estate in Lacombe, Louisiana, which is near New Orleans. Occasionally, prominent and wealthy John Birch Society members would be afforded a demonstration of the training activities at the training site, after which Davis would receive financial contribution for the continuance of the training program. Davis advised that the training of the exiled Cubans was not for the purpose of setting up an invasion force, but was to keep the exiles busy while in the United States. Davis envisioned, through association with John Birch Society members, obtaining $1 million, which he felt necessary to set in motion any plans to overthrow the Castro government in Cuba. However, any plans along these lines were immediately halted upon the disclosure of a cache of bombs located approximately 3 miles from Davis's training site and the subsequent invasion of the area by federal, state, and local authorities. To avert any association between the cache of bombs and Davis's training site, Davis immediately arranged for transportation for the Cuban exiles to Miami, Florida. Davis had no further contact with the Cuban exiles. Davis emphatically denied any association between the cache of bombs and his training camp. To Davis's understanding, a gambler who formerly had ties in Cuba and Las Vegas was responsible for the bomb cache, which Davis supposed had been accumulated for eventual use against Cuba. Davis volunteered that approximately 2 months ago, 2 representatives of District Attorney Jim Garrison's office in New Orleans contacted him in Houston in an effort to elicit information concerning Davis's training camp and anti-Castro activities in New Orleans. Davis obtained the services of an attorney and, upon advisement, refused to discuss these matters with Garrison's 2 assistants, one of which was named Bill Gurbich. Davis further volunteered that approximately 4 months ago he was paid $500 in expenses by Time Life to accompany representatives of this corporation to New Orleans, Louisiana to locate and identify the training site on the De La Barre estate. So, Dusty wraps this up. To borrow a quote from Oliver Stone's 1991 film, "Not all is as it seems. When shifting through the evidence, things are a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma, and deliberately so. The web of interconnectivity between those involved with events leading to the assassination is astounding, mind-boggling even. Smoke and mirrors, windows within windows, vanishing evidence, witnesses silenced, records hidden. Beware of those rabbit holes." So, very interesting stuff from Mr. Dusty, and good work on the Ricardo Davis thing. But just for a moment, let's explore something else. I told you I was reading Coup in Dallas, right, by H.P. Albarelli. And some of the names that pop up here as let's just say a very covert Black Ops CIA asset named Jean-Pierre Lafitte. And this is what the book is based on. Apparently they found or came across a date book or a desktop diary of this Lafitte's, and was given access to it by his widow, Renee. And apparently this guy had ties to all kinds of folks. He ran assassins and everything else. A lot of off-the-books CIA type shit. And one of the names that pops up on the desktop diary, in addition to Oswald, is also Thomas Eli Davis. Now, Dusty doesn't think that the Davis that Ruby said that he was worried about being tied to was Thomas Eli Davis, which apparently the HSCA tried to do and couldn't, but rather it was Ricardo Davis. I, on the other hand, think it was Thomas Eli Davis that Ruby was worried about them finding out about, because from the Spartacus educational site, Thomas Davis was a bank robber who became friends with Jack Ruby in Dallas. According to the wife of Davis, he also worked for the Mafia. He was also involved in the Central Intelligence Agency plot to assassinate Fidel Castro and as a gun runner for the anti-communist forces in Cuba. In the 50s and 60s, Davis worked for the CIA in Indochina, Indonesia, and Algeria. In the summer of '63, Davis helped recruit mercenaries for a planned coup in Haiti. Davis was in North Africa when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in November of '63. The following month, he was arrested and jailed in Tangier in connection with Kennedy's death, where he gave his name as Lee Oswald when he was arrested. Later, it was revealed that Davis was helped to escape from the Moroccan prison by a CIA agent known as QJ Win, who they say was probably Jean Sutra, who was in Dallas when Kennedy was assassinated. Now, this name Jean Sutra also pops up in the book Coup in Dallas, and it is been proved for a reason. Now, if Thomas Eli Davis was connected to these rogue CIA operatives who were, according to H.P. Albarelli, in the know of the planning and execution of the assassination, then yeah, there's a problem. Big problem. Now, according to Anthony Summers in his book Conspiracy, Thomas Eli Davis III was an anti-Castro gun runner associated with Jack Ruby. Of course, Ruby told his first attorney, Tom Howard, that it would be a problem if Davis' name came up. Seth Cantor finally identified Davis, the Warren Commission had only the last name, as a former Texas bank robber. At the time of the assassination, he was in North Africa. Within a month, he was in jail in Tangier. Moroccan police detained him after finding a letter in his handwriting which referred, in passing, to Oswald in the Kennedy assassination. The letter was addressed to a New York attorney. CIA operative QJ Win sprung Davis from jail. QJ Win was the key agent in the Staff D, led by William Harvey Executive Action Program. Steve Ravel, an old school researcher, identified QJ Win as Jose Mankell, a Luxembourg-based smuggler. Of course, we know from now that that identification of QJ Win is wrong. Tom Davis was killed in '73, electrocuted while cutting a power line in the course of an apparent robbery. His wife said he worked as a soldier of fortune in Indochina, Indonesia, Algeria, and Cuba, and she suspected that he had also worked for the Mafia. Author Henry Hurt, in Reasonable Doubt, published a photo of Davis, devoted a part of a chapter to him, including a summary biography including a summary biography. In January of '63, Davis got a passport in New Orleans. He became involved in mercenary activities and was arrested in Tangier for trying to sell guns. He spoke fluent Spanish and vaguely resembled Oswald. He admitted using the name Oswald in his activities. He had approached Ruby about making a porn movie using some of Ruby's strippers. Both were involved with Robert McCown in gun running. He was a professional deep-sea diver and had trained anti-Castro units in Florida and South America. During 1963, he was in California and Louisiana. He resembles Sylvia Odio's description of Oswald. On August 8th through the 10th, '63, T.E. Davis was registered at the Hotel LaSalle in New Orleans. Oswald was arrested August 9th after the street dispute with Carlos Bernier. Davis and his wife left the U.S. on November 2nd and arrived in Tangiers on November the 28th, and he was arrested 10 days later. Upon his arrest, a letter was discovered. The New York lawyer was Thomas G. Proctor. On November the 22nd, he was allegedly in jail briefly in Algiers, gotten out by QJ Wynn. Davis told a reporter in '64 that while in Algeria, he used the name Oswald. He told his third and last wife that he knew who killed President Kennedy. He died trying to steal copper wire from a quarry. The CIA denied having a file on Davis. The FBI had 200 pages but refused to release it on national security grounds. The Army file had been destroyed along with Oswald's in the 1973 file destructions mandated after exposure of Army domestic surveillance. So, that's what we know about Thomas Eli Davis. This is a guy who is going around using Oswald's name, and from the book Coup in Dallas, it's figured prominently into at least having knowledge about the assassination, if not being tangentially involved in the planning or execution thereof. So I just thought it was interesting, something to think about. And without further ado, let's get into the rest of the story. So, moving from that, let's go back to Dallas, Texas. Shortly after the assassination, and what was going on in the Texas Schoolbook Depository. So, first off, let's refresh our memories with an FBI report dated 11/22/63 by Agent Bookout. Lee Harvey Oswald was interviewed at the Homicide and Robbery Bureau, Dallas Police Department by Captain Fritz in the presence of Special Agent James Bookout of the FBI. Oswald was advised of the identity and official capacity of said agent and the fact that he did not have to make any statement at all, that any statement he did make could be used in a court of law against him, and that any statement made must be free and voluntary, and that he had the right to consult with an attorney. So, apparently Oswald was read his rights. Allegedly, Oswald stated that he did not own a rifle. He advised that he saw a rifle day before yesterday at the Texas Schoolbook Depository, which Mr. Truly and two other gentlemen had in their possession and were looking at. Oswald stated that on November the 22nd, 1963, at the time of the search of the Schoolbook Depository building by Dallas police officers, he was on the second floor of said building, having just purchased a Coca-Cola from the soft drink machine, at which time a police officer came into the room with pistol drawn and asked him if he worked there. Mr. Truly was present and verified that he was an employee, and the police officer thereafter left the room and continued throughout the building. Oswald stated that he took his Coke down to the first floor and stood around and had lunch in the employees' lunchroom. He thereafter went outside and stood around for 5 or 10 minutes with Foreman Bill Shelley, and thereafter went home. He stated he left work because, in his opinion, based upon the remarks of Bill Shelley, he did not believe that there was going to be any more work that day due to the confusion in the building. He stated after arriving at his residence that he went to a movie where he was subsequently apprehended by the Dallas Police Department. Oswald stated that his hours of work at the Schoolbook Depository were from 8 a.m. to 4:45 p.m., but that he is not required to punch a time clock. His usual place of work in the building is on the first floor. However, he frequently is required to go to the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th floors of the building in order to get books. So, bear that in mind, folks. That's the statement. According to the FBI, according to Bookout, that's the statement. Now, there's a lot of information contained therein, some of which, I wasn't exactly aware of, that Oswald was read his rights, that he made the statement that he did not own a rifle, that he made the statement that he had just purchased a Coke from the soft drink machine, right? And then he took his Coke down to the first floor and stood around and had lunch in the employee lunchroom, otherwise known as the Domino Room. He thereafter went outside and stood around for 5 or 10 minutes with Foreman Bill Shelley, and thereafter went home. Now, he's making some statements here. And, of course, he's mentioning names. He's mentioning Mr. Truly and a police officer. He's mentioning Bill Shelley by name. Of course, his story could be corroborated by these folks, right? Would think. So, let's have a look at Bill Shelley and his affidavit given at the Dallas Police Department shortly after the assassination. Today, around 12:30 p.m., November 22nd, 1963, I was standing on the front steps of 411 Elm, watching the president in the parade. The president's car was about halfway from Houston Street to the triple underpass when I heard what sounded like 3 shots. I couldn't tell where they were coming from. I ran across the street to the corner of the park and ran into a girl crying, and she said the president had been shot. The girl's name is Gloria Calvary, who is a employee of the same building. I went back to the building and went inside and called my wife and told her what happened. I was on the first floor then. I stayed at the elevator and was told not to let anyone out of the elevator. I left the elevator and went with police on up to the other floors. I left Jack Doherty in charge of the elevator. Okay. So, first statement made by Bill Shelley right after the assassination. He states that he's standing out on the front steps. The president goes by, he hears 3 shots. He runs across the street to Gloria Calvary, who's crying, saying the president's been shot. Then he says he went back in the building, got on the phone, called his wife, told her what happened, and then was told to stay by the elevators and not let anybody off. But then he left his post, and he left Jack Doherty, who seems to be in 20,000 fucking places in the school book depository that day, in charge of the elevator. Okay? Now, bear all that in mind, folks. Bear all that in mind. Because now we're going to fast forward in time. Uh, to Bill Shelley's official statement to the FBI, dated March 18th, 1964. I, William Shelley, make the following voluntary statement to Alfred Neely, who has identified himself to me as a special agent of the FBI. I am of the Caucasian race, 37 years old, and reside at something something Tatum Street, Dallas, Texas. On November the 22nd, 1963, I left my office in the school book depository and walked just outside the front entrance to the building to watch the presidential motorcade pass. This was about 12:15 p.m. I recall that just as the motorcade passed, I was standing just outside the glass doors of the entrance. At the time President Kennedy was shot, I was standing at this same place. Billy Lovelady, who works under my supervision at the school book depository, was seated on the front steps just in front of me. I recall that Wes Frazier, Sarah Stanton, and Carolyn Arnold, all employees of the school book depository, were also standing in this entrance near me at the time President Kennedy was shot. I did not see Lee Harvey Oswald at the time President Kennedy was shot. I did not observe any strangers in the building at any time during the morning of November the 22nd, 1963. Immediately following the shooting, Billy Lovelady and I accompanied some uniformed police officers to the railroad yard just west of the building and returned through the west side door of the building about 10 minutes later. I remained in the building until about 1:30 p.m. when I was asked to go to the Dallas Police Department to furnish an affidavit. I returned to the school book depository at about 5 p.m. I did not leave the building until about 7 p.m. that day. Lee Harvey Oswald worked under my supervision. He was at work when I arrived for work on November the 22nd, 1963. I specifically recall seeing Oswald on the first floor at about 11:50 a.m. this day. He was going about his regular duties, filling orders at that time. I did not see Oswald again after this until I saw him at the Dallas Police Department. I have read this statement consisting of this and the two other pages, and it is true. So, we have some conflicting statements by Bill Shelley. We have what he told the Dallas Police Department immediately after the shooting when he was taken downtown at about 1:30, which says that he watched the parade on the steps, heard the shots, didn't know where they were coming from, ran across the street, talked to Gloria Calvary, went back inside and called his wife. And then 4 months later, we have him telling a whole different story. That he was on the steps with Bill Shelley, or Bill Lovelady, and that after the president was shot, him and Bill Lovelady accompanied some police officers to the railroad yard and then returned to the building. So I'm confused. So what's the truth? I mean, that's two really, really different stories there. And why was he never called to the carpet for these two very, very conflicting stories? Well, let's be fair here. So let's read Billy Lovelady's affidavit. When he was taken immediately down to the Dallas Police Department after the assassination. And he gave a handwritten statement as well. And that's what I'm reading from. These ones from the DPD are their handwritten statements. These aren't dictated by somebody else. They wrote this in their own hand. He says, I work at Texas School Book Depository, 411 Elm, on November the 22nd, 63. I worked on the 6th floor along with Danny Arce, Jack Doherty, Bill Shelley, Charles Givens. When the president came by, Bill Shelley and I standing on the front steps in front of the building where I work. After he had passed and was about 50 yards past us, I heard 3 shots. There was a slight pause after the first shot, and then the next 2 was right close together. I could not tell where the shots came from, but sounded like they were across the street from us. Let's see. Hearing that Oswald has been, I'm trying. Like I said, this is in their handwriting, so bear with me. Have been. I don't know. Hearing that could have been caused by the echo it was uh, after it was over. We went back into the building and went to work, which he crossed out. And then he says, took some police officers up to search the building. I did not see anyone around the building that was not supposed to be there. Our, can't read that word. Our lunch. Oh, our lunch break is from 12 to 12:45 p.m. All of us had left the sixth floor to see the president. Well, apparently not all of you, Billy Lovelady. Apparently, one person he forgot to mention that was up on the sixth floor helping lay floor was Bonnie Ray Williams, who apparently sat up there by his lonesome self and ate his chicken sandwich and slugged on a Dr. Pepper and smoked a cigarette and left his trash up there before coming down to the fifth floor to watch the parade with his buddies. So, that is Billy Lovelady's handwritten affidavit from November the 22nd, 1963, right after the assassination. We've seen the footage, the news footage of Lovelady in the police station, seated at a desk while they bring Oswald into the police department, or they're moving him around from somewhere to somewhere else. That's when he gave his statement. Now, let's see if Billy Lovelady's story changed in 4 months, like his supervisor, Bill Shelley. So on March 19th, 64, I, Billy Nolan Lovelady, freely furnished the following statement to Eugene Petrakis and A. Raymond Switzer, who have identified themselves to me as special agents of the FBI. I am a Caucasian male and reside at 7722 Hume Drive, Apartment C, Dallas, Texas. At approximately 12:15, I walked out the front entrance to the schoolbook depository, where I am employed as a stock clerk on the first floor. I have been so employed since December the 16th, 1961. I walked out in front of the building to await the presidential motorcade, which I knew was due to pass the depository building around 12:30 p.m. At the time the presidential motorcade passed the depository building, heading west on Elm Street, I was standing on the top step to the far right against the wall or entranceway to the schoolbook depository building. At this time, I recall that Bill Shelley, who resides at Tatum, and Mrs. Sarah Stanton, also of Dallas, both of whom are likewise employed at the schoolbook depository, were standing next to me. I recall that following the passing of the motorcade, as the car in which the president was riding traveled down Elm Street extension, I heard several loud reports, which I first thought to be firecrackers, and which appeared to me to be in the direction of the Elm Street viaduct just ahead of the motorcade. I did not at any time believe the shots had come from the schoolbook depository building. I am acquainted with Lee Harvey Oswald as a fellow employee only, and I recall that on the morning of November 22nd, 63, I was on the sixth floor of the schoolbook depository building putting down a new wooden floor when Oswald came over to me and asked where a certain book was stored. I don't recall the name of the book, but told him that book was out of stock. That is the last time I saw Oswald prior to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. I do not recall seeing any strangers in the building. I recall that following the shooting, I ran toward the spot where President Kennedy's car had stopped. Bill Shelley and myself stayed in that area for approximately 5 minutes, when we then re-entered the depository building by the side door located on the west side of the building. After several minutes, we were asked to stay in the building by a police officer, and at approximately 1:45 p.m., I and several other employees accompanied a police officer to City Hall for questioning. I returned to the building briefly at 6:30 p.m. to pick up my coat following the interview at City Hall and immediately departed and went home. I have read this and the preceding 3 pages, initialed each page and each correction, and found it true and correct to the best of my knowledge. Billy Lovelady. So, here we have another different version of events from two guys who were supposedly hanging out together, right? I mean, they both mentioned each other, were on the steps. Now, in Shelley's first affidavit, handwritten affidavit, he doesn't mention Billy Lovelady other than the fact that, well, I don't think he mentioned him at all. And in Lovelady's, he just mentioned that he was on the steps. So, to go in the course of 4 months to Shelley changing his story to be that him and Lovelady went to the railroad yard and helped cops or followed the police to the railroad yard and then returned to the building. Now, this time, Lovelady is saying that they walked down to where Kennedy was shot and hung around there for 5 or 10 minutes. Now, we all know President Kennedy was shot in the middle of Elm Street. There was a lot of excitement going on, around Elm Street and the grassy knoll and the pergola and the railroad yard, of course. So, how do we come to some kind of understanding as to what the real story is here? Well, logic would tell you that the events, you know, relayed within the hours immediately following the assassination would be more correct than the ones after 4 months have passed and they've had time to talk to each other and come up with some kind of a narrative of sorts of their activities. The question is, why did their stories change? Well, that, folks, is the $1,000,000 question. Now, when Barry Ernest interviewed Victoria Adams in 2002 for his book, The Girl on the Stairs, which I've said is a fantastic book and you should all buy it and read it, we learned the following things. Within a half hour of the assassination, Shelley and Lovelady were taken to DPD headquarters and gave signed affidavits stating that immediately after the shooting, they went to the rear of the TSBD on the first floor. They stayed by the freight elevators and then accompanied police as they searched the upper floors of the schoolbook depository. Shelley was then photographed as he, Danny Arce, and Bonnie Ray Williams were escorted by police to a squad car and driven to police headquarters. Now, I happen to find a little evidence that contradicts that tiny little statement. And for all the people out there who think that they know what Bill Shelley looks like based on the photos of which are clearly Danny Arce, Bonnie Ray Williams, being put into a squad car and taken down uh, to the city hall to give statements. I take you back to the Warren Commission testimony of Bonnie Ray Williams. Right? He says this. First, I think they took me and another fellow, Danny. They took us in one car. Then they took some other fellows in another car, and then another car. You were with Danny Arce and one or two police officers. Yes, sir. Anybody else? Mr. Williams says, that's all. They brought Bill Shelley and Bill Lovelady, and a fellow by the name of Jack Doherty and Charles Gibbons later on, they brought them in right behind us. Now, I would think that Bonnie Ray Williams knows who his supervisor is. I would think if he's on the floor crew with Bill Shelley, Lovelady, and Doherty and all these other guys, that he knows who they are. They're co-workers. Bill Shelley's his supervisor. And he's telling you right then and there that Bill Shelley was not in the same car as him. So the fella that you see that's been identified as Bill Shelley in the photos where they're getting in the police car, it ain't Bill Shelley, folks. It's not Bill Shelley. We have no idea what the fuck Bill Shelley looks like. So when people tell you, oh, well, there's, that could be Bill Shelley in New Orleans, Louisiana, in front of the trademark there, as Oswald's handing out leaflets. No. That just further corroborates the fact that it could be Thomas Beckham, who looks a lot more like the person in the photo. Because we have no idea what in the hell Bill Shelley looks like, folks. We don't have a good picture of him. And Bonnie Ray Williams is telling you right here, it's in the Warren Commission testimony of Bonnie Ray Williams. You were there with Danny Arce and one or two police officers. Yes, sir. Anybody else? That's all. They brought Shelley and Lovelady, a fellow by the name of Doherty and Gibbons later on. They brought them right behind us. But they weren't in the same car as him. So the person that's been misidentified as Bill Shelley for all these years is nothing more than another police officer. The man in the suit and the tie, who's kind of, avoiding the shotgun in the face. Like, hey, get that thing out of my face. So this guy is law enforcement of some kind. It is not Bill Shelley, folks. Sorry to say. Sorry, not Bill Shelley. So moving on. Victoria Adams stated that she saw Shelley and Lovelady on the first floor about 1 minute after the shooting, as recorded in DPD Detective Jane Lavell's interview of Adams in February of '64. In her Warren Commission testimony about seeing Shelley and Lovelady on the first floor 1 minute after the shooting was recorded on April the 7th, 1964. Shortly after giving testimony to the Warren Commission, Adams read her deposition, made corrections, and signed the document. This careful, accurate, intelligent woman read and signed this document wherein she testified to seeing Shelley and Lovelady on the first floor of the schoolbook depository 1 minute after the shooting. This document was classified top secret for the next 30 years, folks. By testifying she saw Shelley and Lovelady on the first floor within 1 minute of the shooting, the Warren Commission attorneys became acutely aware of a serious timing problem, which is why her corrected and signed Warren Commission testimony was classified top secret. The Warren Commission did not interview her supervisor, Dorothy Garner, who stood by the fourth floor stairway and watched Adams and Stiles run down the stairs. She also watched Truly and Baker as they ran past her up to the fifth floor. She neither heard nor saw anyone else on the stairway. The Warren Commission deposed Vicki Adams at 2:15 p.m., Lovelady at 3:50, Bill Shelley at 4:10, all on the same day, April 7th, 1964. The only way that Warren Commission attorney Joseph Ball knew to ask both Shelley and Lovelady if they saw Vicki Adams on 11/22/63 was because of her testimony, taken only 2 hours earlier. Ball's asking Shelley and Lovelady about Vicki Adams is proof that Adams told the Warren Commission that she saw Shelley and Lovelady on the first floor within 1 minute of the shooting, which was recorded in her Warren Commission testimony. Without Adams' testimony, Attorney Ball would have no reason to ask Shelley or Lovelady about Vicki Adams a couple hours later. Wesley Lieber read Adams' Warren Commission testimony and wrote, Victoria Adams testified she came down the stairway within 1 minute after the shots. from the fourth floor to the first floor, where she encountered two depository employees, Bill Shelley and Billy Lovelady. If Adams saw these two men on the first floor, near the freight elevators and stairway, only 1 minute after the shooting, then how could Oswald have ran down the stairs from the sixth to the second floor at the same time? DPD officer Marion Baker said that there were two white men on the first floor, at the back of the TSBD, about 1.5 minutes after the shooting. If these two white men were not Shelley and Lovelady as identified by Victoria Adams, then who were these men? Why did the Warren Commission not bring Baker, Shelley, and Lovelady together for the purpose of asking Officer Baker if these were the two men that he saw at the rear of the TSBD about 1.5 minutes after the shooting? If not Shelley and Lovelady, then why did Roy Truly fail to identify either of these men to Officer Baker as strangers? And who, if not Truly, told Bill Shelley to stay by the elevators and not let anyone off? Very good questions. Shelley and Lovelady both changed their testimony as to their whereabouts immediately following the shooting on 3 separate occasions. I've told you of at least 2. Why change testimony if not to hide their whereabouts and activities at the back of the schoolbook depository on the first floor only moments after the shooting? There is no indication nor proof that Victoria Adams told anyone prior to talking with Barry Ernest that she did not see Shelley or Lovelady when she arrived on the first floor of the TSBD 1 minute after the shooting. 40 years later, she told Ernest for the first time she thinks someone added the information about Shelley and Lovelady to her testimony. Question: if Adams claimed that someone had added Shelley and Lovelady's information to Adams's original testimony in an attempt to challenge her claim that she saw both men on the first floor 1 minute after the shooting, then why does her testimony say that she saw Shelley and Lovelady only 1 minute after the shooting? If additional testimony had been added by the FBI or Warren Commission, then this additional testimony would have necessarily said that Adams saw Shelley and Lovelady 5 to 10 minutes after the shooting, certainly not 1 minute after the shooting. How could additional testimony have been added to the DPD interview of Adams by James Lavelle on February 17, 1964? How could information about Shelley and Lovelady have been added when Adams read, corrected, and signed her Warren Commission testimony? Warren Commission attorney Ball became aware of Shelley and Lovelady's presence at the rear of the TSBD 1 minute after the shooting only because of Adams's Warren Commission testimony. JFK researcher, investigator, and author Barry Ernest knew that Adams was clearly uneasy when discussing Shelley and Lovelady. The question of whether or not Shelley and Lovelady were on the first floor at the rear of the schoolbook depository within 1 minute of the shooting was crucial. And why were they there? In 1964, 5 months after the shooting, both Shelley and Lovelady say they did not return to the building for 5 or 10 minutes. In 2002, nearly 40 years after the shooting, Victoria Adams said she did not see either man when she arrived on the first floor. Barry Ernest knew that Adams' original testimony was recorded by a court stenographer, as was the testimony of all persons interviewed by the commission. He traveled to the National Archives and asked to examine the court stenographer's record. Mr. Ernest was surprised and troubled when advised that the original stenographer's records for April 7, 1964 were missing. The only people to have access to National Archive records are people within our federal government. And if certain records disappear from the archives, then they disappear for the benefit of the government. Without the original stenographer's record, we will never know if her Warren Commission testimony as recorded in the 26 volumes was accurate. Vicki Adams died on November the 15th, 2007 of cancer, so it's now up to JFK researchers to determine the truth. Was Adams' Warren Commission testimony accurately recorded and published in the Warren Commission volumes? Did she see Shelley and Lovelady on the first floor 1 minute after the shooting? Or did Adams, after 40 years of threats and intimidation, finally just give up and say what the government had wanted her to say all along? The decision is yours. Now, I refer you back 2. Vicki Adams. Warren Commission testimony. Again, marked top secret for some reason. And this is Attorney Beelan. Miss Adams says, and from our vantage point, we were able to see what the president's wife was wearing, the roses in the car, and things that would attract a woman's attention. Then we heard, then we were distracted by the view. By what? Miss Adams says, a tree. And we heard subsequent shots and a pause and then a second shot and then a third shot. It sounded like a firecracker or a cannon at a football game. It seemed, sorry, it's a shitty copy. It seemed as if it came from the right below rather than the left above, probably because of the report. And after the third shot, following that third shot, I went to the back of the building, down the back stairs, and encountered Bill Shelley and Bill Lovelady on the first floor on the way out to the Houston Street dock, which is at the rear of the building. So that is allegedly what she said in 1964. So, I mean, what can we glean from all this, folks? Um, when they asked Lovelady and Shelley about Vicki Adams, Joseph Ball says, "Did you see Vicki Adams after you came into the building? And did you see her on the first floor?" Mr. Shelley says, "I sure don't remember." "You don't?" Mr. Ball asks. Mr. Shelley says, "No." So, I mean, it is what it is. Dorothy Garner, Gloria Calvary, uh, both were not interviewed by the Warren Commission. They weren't asked anything about Shelley or Lovelady or Vicki Adams, for that matter, or what they did. So at the end of the day, April 7th, 64, the Warren Commission had a DPD police report and Adams' testimony that she saw Shelley and Lovelady on the first floor 1 minute after the shooting. They also had Shelley and Lovelady's DPD affidavits, wherein both men said that immediately after the shooting they went back into the building. The commission also had FBI reports and now had their Warren Commission testimony that contradicted both Adams' testimony and the original Shelley and Lovelady affidavits of 11/22/63. While the Warren Commission did not ask Shelley or Lovelady to explain why their DPD affidavits conflicted with their testimonies is now obvious. The Warren Commission knew that Oswald could not have ran down the stairs within 1 minute of the shooting because he would have been seen or heard by Adams and Stiles. The Commission's only option was to accept without question the testimony of Shelley and Lovelady, who said that they did not return to the TSBD for 10 minutes. The Commission accepted and relied upon their Warren Commission testimony, wherein Shelley and Lovelady said that they did not return to the TSBD for at least 5 to 10 minutes. They concluded that Lovelady may have seen Adams talking with Shelley, and that Shelley may have seen Adams later in the day on the fourth floor. The commission found that there was enough time for Oswald to have run from the sixth floor to the second floor lunchroom after Adams and Stiles ran down the stairs and left the TSBD. On May 14th, 64, 5 weeks after learning from Victoria Adams and Officer Marion Baker about the two men on the first floor, between 1 and 1.5 minutes after the shooting, Commission Attorney David Beelan interviewed Roy Truly, questioning Truly about the two men at the back of the TSBD within 1 minute of the shooting. Should have been Beelan's focus of attention. Beelan, however, pointedly failed to ask Truly to describe or identify either of these men. Why? Because Beelan did not want the identity of these men on the record. Beelan dared not ask Truly to identify these men. Beelan never asked Truly if they were strangers, never asked Truly if he knew these men, and never asked Truly if they were TSBD employees. Throughout his testimony, Roy Truly never spoke a word nor volunteered any information about these two men. Both Shelley and Lovelady could have been brought before Officer Baker in an attempt to confirm or deny these were the two white men seen by Baker at the rear of the schoolbook depository only 1.5 minutes after the shooting. But the Warren Commission did not want these two white men identified, and therefore failed to properly question Roy Truly and Officer Baker. Truly should have identified these men to Officer Baker. If these men were strangers, then Baker would have asked them for identification and their reason for being in the TSBD. If Truly identified these men as Bill Shelley and Bill Lovelady, then two very serious issues would require answers. If identified by Truly as Shelley Lovelady 1.5 minutes after the shooting, then these two were undoubtedly the same two men seen by Vicki Adams in the same location only 1 minute after the shooting. The Warren Commission knew that it was impossible for anyone from the 6th floor to have run from the 6th floor sniper's nest to the northwest stairway at the back of the building and down to the 2nd floor lunchroom without having been seen or heard by Vicki Adams and Sandra Stiles, and then to have been confronted by Baker and Truly. And number two, why were Shelley and Lovelady near the freight elevators only 1 minute after the shooting? During his testimony, Roy Truly's silence, his lack of candor, his behavior, and his failure to volunteer any information about these two men are indicative of a co-conspirator. Well, that's a matter of conjecture. Of course, meaning if he was a, quote, co-conspirator, then Oswald was sent to the TSBD by, quote, CIA asset babysitter Ruth Payne, hired by co-conspirator Truly, and directly supervised by CIA asset Bill Shelley only weeks before President Kennedy's motorcade passed in front of the TSBD. And let's not forget that after witnessing shots fired at the president, Roy Truly ran back inside the TSBD and ran up the stairs looking for the shooters without showing any fear of danger. A half hour later, it was Truly, after Bill Shelley said that he had not seen Oswald, who told Captain Fritz that Oswald was the only missing schoolbook depository employee. Following the assassination, the FBI wanted to fingerprint all the TSBD employees, a request to which Roy Truly strongly objected. But why? So now, folks, we're in conjecture land. From here we go into something we've talked about on the show before, and it kind of ties into, and I know some folks out there are not fans of the, quote, Elsie Glaze letters that were sent to the HSCA. Elsie Glaze was a Dallas journalist who in 1974 met a woman who had been working for the schoolbook depository since 1969. Her immediate supervisor was Bill Shelley, who Glaze contacted and met on numerous occasions. In 1989, Glaze wrote, Mr. Shelley claims to have been an intelligence officer during World War II and thereafter joined the CIA. From all indications, Oswald was alone in the 2nd floor lunchroom, right? When Baker and Truly found him there, allegedly. However, Oswald cannot prove that he was in the lunchroom and therefore needed someone to say that he and Oswald were together during the shooting and not on the 6th floor of the schoolbook depository. So, while being questioned by Captain Fritz, Oswald said that he was, quote, out with Bill Shelley in front during the shooting. This was recorded on handwritten notes by Captain Fritz and FBI agent Jim Hosty. And also, thank you, Bart, book out. Oswald expected his supervisor and CIA contact, Shelley, to confirm that he and Oswald were together during the shooting. But Oswald did not realize that Shelley was part of a plan to make sure that he quickly left the TSBD shortly after shots were fired at President Kennedy. Oswald's hasty departure would make it appear as though he was evading capture by the police. When Shelley was questioned about Oswald's whereabouts after the shooting, Shelley denied being with Oswald, as in he was not on the front steps with him. It was also very likely probable that it was Shelley who instructed Oswald to leave the TSBD, instructed him to board the Marsalis bus, number 433, and instructed him to meet a contact at the Texas Theater. After the shooting, someone instructed Oswald to go to the Texas Theater, and someone gave Oswald the halves of two $1 bills that would likely be used to confirm his contact. If not Shelley, then who? Who? Now, we know there's been a lot of fuckery with Frazier, Buell Frazier, and his statements about seeing Oswald leave the school book depository that day. He says that he saw him leave right out the front, walk past him. But he's also said that he saw Oswald coming down Houston Street, which it would indicate that he had left through the rear of the building. And then he watched him walk up Houston Street and make a left on the main street. Now, if Victoria Adams is correct in her sighting of Bill Shelley and Billy Lovelady at the rear of the school book depository within a minute after the shooting, or roughly thereafter, could it be that this is exactly what went down? That you have individuals who were likely ushered Lee Oswald out the back of the building for whatever reason. Oswald was clearly supposed to stay inside the building during the motorcade and the shooting. But then you throw Prayer Man into the mix. And maybe Oswald did come outside for a hot minute. Right behind Bill Shelley and Bill Lovelady. And that all three, immediately after the shooting, went back inside the first floor of the school book depository. And Oswald was given a couple things, told what to do. And I don't know what his part in the whole thing was. You know, he clearly wasn't on the sixth floor shooting. His rifle was clearly planted on the sixth floor. Or one, not necessarily his rifle, but one that was ordered in his name. And he was ushered by Bill Shelley and Bill Lovelady out the back door of the school book depository. And as he left, he turned, came up Houston Street, walked past the school book depository, and in between that and the Dow Tech's building. And Frazier's still on the front steps, dumbfounded, staring into space. And then he catches out of the corner of his eye his old buddy Lee Oswald, who he's been bringing to work every day, leaving immediately following the events of what just happened. Which makes you question what the hell was going on here. And we've talked on this show too about the spider web of the Texas School Depository, which indicates that some of these publishing companies and book supplies were being used as front, a quote unquote CIA type front used for various things. I mean, who's gonna question, you know, state sponsored books or boxes that are marked books? You can send all kinds of things to all kinds of places under that guise. And I will also mention, after Bill Harvey was retired by the CIA, he did go on to work for you guessed it, book publishing company. So take that for what it's worth and chew on all this stuff. And let me know, folks, what you think about all this shit going on here. And all this Dealey Plaza fuckery with Lovelady, Shelley, Adams, Truly, and Oswald. What's the real story here, folks? Think about it. And I'll see you next time. Peace.